But there's a couple of other statistics I want to point you to, because I think it's like easy for like to cherry pick like two things that sort of make your point, but like I can kind of do the same thing, which is why I think getting beyond the like who's doing what is sort of reductive at this point. But in 2024, the DOJ had a study which the Trump DOJ took down because it didn't back up their inferences about things. But
hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we have an absolutely electric matchup that I cannot wait to break down with you. Batya Ungar-Sargon sits down with Democratic strategist Mike Nellis to debate one of the most heated questions in America right now, where political violence is actually coming from. Batya brings polling data she believes points squarely at the left, but Mike walks in prepared with counter data, fact checks, and even some of her own tweets pulled up on screen. The exchange gets sharp. The numbers start flying, and one side ends up cornered in a way you really have to see for yourself. Make sure you stick around for the entire thing, because the strongest moment lands deeper into the conversation, and trust me, you do not want to miss how it all plays out. Also, drop a comment and let me know what part of the world you are tuning in from. I genuinely love seeing where everyone is watching from. It makes this community feel real. All right, let's get into it.
Okay, I want to get your reaction to some polling that we have. And the reason that I think this is such an important debate is, and I want to be the person who can say, like, yeah, it's coming from both sides. We all have a role in it. We can all fix it, not least because if I am right and that I believe it's mostly coming from the left, I'm powerless to fix it because no one on the left listens to me. So it would be, I would much prefer.
I listen to you. I just might not agree with you, but I listen to you.
On my side, because that gives me agency and power to fix it. But, you know, when I feel that if we can't accurately name where it's coming from, we can't fix it, which is why I want to sort of call your attention to this. So let's start with some polling. Cher, can you pull up the poll from YouGov? So this poll came from, this one. So this poll came out it was 2025, September 10th of 2025. And as you can see here, Mike, if you look at political ideology, Americans who call themselves very liberal. So the poll was, do you ever think political violence is legitimate? And 25% of very liberal Americans said, yes, violence can sometimes be justified. 17% of liberals said it can sometimes be justified. 9% of moderates, 6% of conservatives, and then it looks to me like 3% of very conservatives. To me, Mike, I look at this and it seems like the more liberal you identify, the more legitimate you think political violence is. And there's a second poll I just want to call your attention to, and then I want to get your take on it. Cher, can you pull up The Economist? So here you see something similar, which is that the question, is it ever justified for citizens to resort to violence in order to achieve political goals? The percent who said yes, you can see that obviously young people, it's higher, but for liberals, it's way higher. So young liberal people will have the highest, it looks like about 30% there, as opposed to people who identify as conservative, where it never passes the 10% mark. So I guess what's your reaction? I mean, to me, like, it just seems like pretty obvious, like polling does seem to suggest a correlation, at least, between identifying as liberal, identifying as very liberal, and then having a tolerance for, a belief in that political violence is justified.
Yeah, so I mean, I took a look at the crosstabs for both of these before we started, because I've seen you post them before and I've seen you talk about them on News Nation. And so I think especially for the first one that you showed, but for both of these, one, they were taken in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, more or less, give or take a little bit of time there. And I think it's problematic to poll on that in the middle of a nationally traumatic thing, because it's going to change the way that people are reacting. And it's better to do it when there isn't something fresh, because there's probably some people on the left who were over indexing to that, given how a lot of people felt on my party about that. And by the way, the assassination of Kirk was horrible. I found out on live TV and immediately did what I think a normal person should do, which is like express condolences to the family. And I think we don't have enough people in our space right now acting like normal people. Yeah. And just trying to not rush to get like engagement and shit. Am I allowed to curse on here? I don't want to get you in trouble. I didn't ask.
Mike, you can do whatever you want on here.
Perfect. All right. Well, listen, I'm used to talking to you on television. So like, I'm trying to be like, you know, I'm Irish Catholic from the Midwest. It's in my DNA.
You have to understand something right off the bat. when Batya opens this segment by saying she wants to be the person who admits political violence comes from both sides, but if she's right that it's mostly coming from the left, she is, quote, powerless to fix it because no one on the left listens to her. That is a massive tell, because what she just did is set up a frame where her conclusion is already locked in before any data even hits the table. She walked in, decided, and then immediately pivots to two cherry-picked polls to confirm what she already believed. And here's the part that blows my mind. She drops these numbers like they're some kind of gotcha. 25% of very liberal Americans saying violence can sometimes be justified. 17% of liberals, 9% of moderates, 6% of conservatives. And she goes, the more liberal you identify, the more you tolerate political violence. Case closed, right? Wrong. Because Mike comes in with the most devastating thing you can do to a polling argument, which is question when the poll was taken. He points out, both of these were conducted in the wake of a major political assassination of a conservative figure. He says it's problematic to poll on something in the middle of a nationally traumatic moment because it changes how people respond. And he's not wrong. That's polling 101. Emotional spike data is bad data. You cannot build a national thesis on numbers harvested while half the country is still processing grief and the other half is processing rage. Let me break down why this matters. If you ask people about violence right after a violent event, of course the responses spike. Some get more sympathetic toward retaliation, some get more horrified. The numbers move. That's why serious researchers wait. And the fact that Batya, a journalist, is leaning on these snapshot polls as her foundational evidence tells you everything about how thin the case actually is. She's leading with her weakest cards because they look strong on a graphic.
But there's a couple of other statistics I want to point you to, because I think it's like easy for like to cherry pick like two things that sort of make your point, but like I can kind of do the same thing, which is why I think getting beyond the like who's doing what is sort of reductive at this point. But in 2024, the DOJ had a study which the Trump DOJ took down because it didn't back up their inferences about things. But if you look at incidents of right-wing violence, it's dramatically outstretched to right wing. There were, I forget the exact timeline here, I didn't write it down, but I believe it was like something like the early 90s to like 2024. There were 224 incidents of right wing violence compared to 42 incidents of left wing violence. Again, Trump's DOJ took it down, has not replaced that with anything, did not give an explanation for why they took that down. Cato, which is not a partisan organization relative to left versus right, it's a libertarian group. They found that over half of political violence in America comes from the right wing and only 22% comes from the left wing. So I flagged that. YouGov had a poll, which was actually just from a few days ago, I believe, which had, if you ask right-wing voters if violence is acceptable, excuse me, I actually got this wrong. They asked independent voters whether or not they believe right-wing violence or left-wing violence is a bigger problem. 33% said right-wing violence was a bigger problem. 20% said left-wing violence. And I would argue that's a better metric given the fact that the left and the right get skewed in their echo chambers, whereas independents are much more likely to be free thinking relative to where we're at. And then TIP had a poll, which I believe was towards the end of last year, and asked people who identify as Republicans whether or not they think violence can be acceptable in political circumstances. 35% said yes. Dems was 23% yes. But my thing is like 35% for Republicans, 23% for Dems. You can find one that shows the inverse of that. We're really not talking about that much difference because 90% of Americans will tell you violence is not the way to deal with any of our problems. I'll tell you that right now and condemn what the shooter did. I'll condemn what the guy did for Charlie Kirk. But I do have a little bit of a problem, and I want to bring this up because I went through and I pulled some of your tweets, by as you did with mine, I'm sure, because I know you like to be prepared for this stuff. So do I. Is when I go through the tweets from MAGA influencers, there's sort of this. They want to own all the political violence. You want to say it's only happening to us. The bullets are only flying one way, I think is a direct quote from one of your tweets. I've seen that talking point from a lot of other people, but that's simply not the case. Like there are bullets that are flying at Democratic Party offices. Melissa Hortman was murdered by a 3-time Trump supporter. And then you talk about the truth here. And you talk about, because you said this relative to Barack Obama's tweet, and I'm going to see if I have it here. I do have it right here.
This is where the entire framing collapses. Mike opens by basically saying, look, anyone can cherry pick 2 polls. I can do the exact same thing. And then he proceeds to do exactly that, except his stack is heavier and from more sources. And he turns Batya's whole strategy into a mirror she has to look into. He brings up a Department of Justice study from a few years back that tracked political violence incidents over roughly 3 decades. Mike said the number was 224 incidents of right-wing violence compared to 42 incidents of left-wing violence. That is not a small gap, that is a 5-to-1 ratio, and here's the part that should make every honest viewer pause. According to Mike, that study was taken down by the current administration with no replacement and no public explanation. That alone deserves its own conversation. Then he stacks more. He cites a libertarian organization, which means it's not coming from a partisan left-wing think tank. Mike said this libertarian group found that over half of political violence in America comes from the right wing and only 22% comes from the left wing. So now you have a nonpartisan, non-aligned source telling you the same story. Then he goes to independents, the most reliable group when measuring real public sentiment because they're not stuck in either echo chamber. 33% of independents said right-wing violence is the bigger problem. 20% said left-wing. That is a 13-point gap among the people who don't have a tribal stake in the answer. Here's what people don't realize. Mike just demonstrated something Batya never did, which is intellectual honesty. He admitted up front that you can find polls saying both things, and the difference between Republican and Democrat tolerance for violence is closer than people think. He's not pretending his side is innocent, but the data load on his side is heavier, broader, and from more diverse sources. That's not cherry picking. That's evidence stacking. And then he hits her with the cleanest blow of the whole exchange. He pulls up one of her own tweets where she wrote that the bullets are only flying one way. Mike then immediately disproves it with a real example, the murder of Melissa Hortman in Minnesota by a documented right-wing supporter. The tweet exposed.
Because Barack Obama tweeted something and everybody was pretty upset about it yesterday because it came a little bit after the Shooter's Manifesto came out. And I don't think they updated this copy before they posted it, which is malpractice, in my opinion. They should have updated it. But Barack Obama said, we don't have the details yet, but this tragedy's horrible. And then you said something which is, this is a lie. The gunman's manifesto has been published 6 hours ago, but it's also a confession, an admission that the motive is damning to President Obama's side, hence the need to lie. Now, I don't know if they were lying, but the point I would make relative to this is it's a lie to suggest that violence is only happening towards the right, that it's only happening to Donald Trump. If we're counting these three incidents, Butler and then the one at Mar-a-Lago and then this one as assassination attempts, if you stretch that out, then there's actually been 11 assassination attempts against Barack Obama. Butler obviously being far greater than closer than anybody else has ever been in a very long time trying to assassinate a president. But also, if the lie makes the motive damning, as you suggest about Barack Obama's tweet, then why are so many people lying about Melissa Hortman and her husband's murder? Why don't so many people not want to talk about Gretchen Whitmer almost being kidnapped? Why don't they want to talk about all the instances of it happening? And that's why I'd like to get beyond the sort of like, is it your people or is it my people? Because it's like there's a lot of deranged, sick people with access to weapons who are trying to hurt one another. And I don't think it's helpful to just try to blame each other intrinsically in that, if that makes sense. I might have misused the word intrinsically.
I so want to get there. I really do. But okay, I'm glad you brought up Melissa Hortman because she's the example that Democrats often bring up to suggest that the bullets are going in the other direction. The problem is that the man who killed her wrote a confession to the FBI, to Kash Patel, in which he said that Tim Walz had told him to do it. Now, I don't think Tim Walz told him to kill Melissa Hortman. I think he is a deranged individual, but he was clearly not being motivated by a right-wing ideology in the same way that Butler and the second guy who tried to kill Trump and the third guy who tried to kill Trump and the guy who killed Charlie Kirk and all of these other, the guy who firebombed Josh Shapiro's house, Elias Rodriguez, who killed 2 people outside the Jewish Museum, the guy who just tried, the 2 ISIS guys who tried to, throw Molotov cocktails in New York City. Like, these people are all being motivated by a very recognizably left-wing ideology, whereas Melissa Hortman, that was a man who was like just obviously deranged. She said Tim Walz, by the way, a Democrat, had told him to do it. Gretchen Whitmer, I mean, there's been a lot of reporting about how much entrapment went on there. I mean, a lot of that was like, I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theorist.
This is the checkmate moment, and I want you to really sit with how brilliant this rhetorical move is. Mike takes Batya's own logic, the exact framework she built earlier in the conversation about a former Democratic leader's tweet supposedly being damning because of what it didn't say, and he turns it back on her side. He goes, if your standard is that what someone doesn't say reveals their motive, then explain why so many voices on the right refuse to talk about Melissa Hortman and her husband. Explain why the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot gets memory hold. Explain why all these incidents flowing in the other direction get scrubbed from the conversation. Mike said it's a lie to suggest violence is only happening toward the right, and the same logic Batya used to indict the left applies to the right when they go silent on these cases. You cannot have it both ways. And here's what I love about Mike's closing pivot. He says there's a lot of deranged, sick people with access to weapons trying to hurt one another, and it's not helpful to just blame each other. He's not pretending the left has clean hands. He's saying the framework Batya is using, where one side owns all the suffering and the other side owns all the blame, is broken. It's narrative, not analysis. Then watch what happens to Batya. She tries to recover by jumping to the Hortman case, claiming the killer wrote a confession blaming a Democrat. So her counter is, well, that one was actually motivated by left-wing influence. Then on Whitmer, she retreats to the entrapment narrative, claiming federal involvement complicates whether it really counts. You see what she's doing? Every time a right-wing case comes up, she finds an asterisk. Every left-wing case is a clean ideological signal. That is the definition of motivated reasoning. Here's the educational moment I want to leave you with. Throughout American history, political violence has rarely been a one-sided phenomenon, but it has had clear surges tied to specific eras and movements. The historical record, going back to incidents documented for decades, consistently shows that organized political violence in this country has come from many directions, and pretending otherwise is exactly how we fail to address it. Honest data work means following where the evidence leads, not where your tribe wants it to land. Mike won this exchange not because he's louder or more aggressive, but because he showed up with broader sourcing, internal consistency, and the willingness to apply the same standard to his own side. That is what an actual debate looks like. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.